story of the birth of John the Baptist is not much more remarkable than the birth of any of us. True, the story as presented in Luke's Gospel has some details that did not appear at my birth or yours, but the main elements are the same for us as for him. First, John had a mother and father, as do we all. His parents were religious people, something that's true of many of us. They had friends who celebrated their child's birth with them, something that likely happened at our own births. They came from a culture that had certain customs when it came to naming children. In the case of Zechariah and Elizabeth, the custom was to name a firstborn boy after his grandfather. Coincidentally, in my own cultural background, the same is common, and I am named after my grandfathers. But it's more common among my relatives for parents to choose other names. In John the Baptist's case, people wanted to name him after his own father instead of his grandfather, but his parents chose a totally different name. The similarities between ourselves and John are not limited to what the Gospel says about his birth. John grew up, as we do. He found a vocation and lived it out. So do we. He was religious, as are many of us. He suffered because of the sin and stupidity of others, as we all have. And he died, as we all will. The world John lived in was also much like ours. Of course, many things have changed in 2,000 years, especially in terms of technology. But many things are the same. People still love and hate. People still hope and fear. People still bring joy and sorrow into each other's lives. People still harm and help one another. People still wonder about God. The details, of course, are different. Sometimes very different, but similarities between us and John are many. God was part of John's life. He knew that wherever his life might lead him, whether to the desert of Judea or to the palace of Herod, so long as he was faithful to God, all would be well, even if it meant death. That raises a question for me. Am I similar to John in this as well? Is God really a part of my life? Of course, God is a part of everyone's life, whether we know it or not, or admit it or not. But how aware of that am I from day to day? Is my faith simply a Sunday morning and nighttime prayers matter? Or do I live as much as possible as someone who knows I am not alone? If I were to do so, there would be other similarities between me and John. The first is that, like John, who recognized Jesus in the crowd that came to be baptized, I would be able to recognize the Lord at work in the world around me. The second is that I would devote myself to pointing the Lord out to others. Through my deeds and words, I would show them what it means to know the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, what it means to know that God is among us. Yet another is that I would point out when and how our world, how we ourselves, act as if God were not among us. We would remind ourselves that the Lamb of God came to take away the sins of the world because there is, in fact, sin in the world, in our lives. That might lead to another similarity to John, rejection. Such rejection cost John his life. We may not be brought to that extreme, but we can be sure that if we challenge a world that tries to live without the justice of God, we will pay some price. And if we live that way, it shall lead to a final similarity with John. He is, after all, Saint John, one whose faithfulness to God was matched by God's faithfulness to him. We're born like John. We can live like John. We will die like John. We can be saints like John.